Hey, thanks all. It's really great to be here. This has definitely been like one of the best conferences I've had the fortune to be at in my career. So yeah, it's just been super so far. And like we're nearly through it all. My talk today is going to be about our journey through the last, I don't know, 11, 12 years, how we've worked with a Rails monolith and how we didn't for a while. It's also like a pretty fun thing to be talking about right now because there was like some pretty recent Twitter tech world discourse. You know, I saw like DHH refer to monoliths versus microservices, and I'm sure like things will move on to test-driven development in the next month or so. But right now it's like topical, so I'm happy to talk about it. So we all know the story. There's like a business that does useful things for their customers, and as a result, that business grows, and so do the number of people working on it. And this success creates problems. And so this causes many fires to be fought at the same time, like maintaining product market fit, adding janky workarounds for your biggest customers, like keeping tests running, making sure deployments don't bring the whole system down. And so like just lots of stuff happens. And so productivity degrades, and like leadership are wishing that they were back in the good old days of actually building stuff for customers, and you know, things just are no longer fun to work with. And so maybe some engineers start to talk about like inconsistent coding standards, and you have some few nasty outages, and security upgrades become really tough. And so there's some solutions out there. You know, we've all seen a few conference talks about microservices and that, and so breaking up the monolith starts to become something that's initially discussed in the pub after work, that escalates to lunch, and then later on that becomes something that actually starts making it into roadmaps. And ambitious engineers, you know, want to make their mark and support a move away from the pesky monolith. Like, who wouldn't want to contribute to the future of the business by building some cool greenfield projects? Like this time, for real, we'll finally get like ahead of all those quality, scalability, and coordination problems that are slowing us down so much. Of course, I'm setting up a bit of a twist here, but you know, so I'll do a bit of an intro. So I work for Intercom, B2B SaaS company. We're like a customer service platform that used to send about 600 million messages a month to over 800 million monthly active users on our platform. You've probably been on many sites with our messenger that pops up. We founded in 2011, part of like the Cambrian-esque explosion of businesses that really came out of the new technologies that became available at the time, such as like the cloud, mobile, and Ruby on Rails, of course. So this is a bit of an architecture talk. Like, to be honest, I'm probably the worst Ruby on Rails developer standing on stage over the last few days. So I'm going to be talking like a little high level. There won't be like a load of Ruby on Rails code here. But the core of Intercom is a Ruby on Rails app today. And that's like where the vast majority of our customer requests are served and processed, and our data is stored. And the first commit was made in like 2011. We were running 3.03 at the time. And these days we're running 7.08. You can see like my colleague Eugene here committing, this was actually 2 days ago. And we've got about 1.8 million lines of code, of which actually the majority are in spec files. We typically run about like 50,000 Rails processes running across 1,000 EC2 hosts of many different shapes and sizes. And we've got some like scaling patterns of where we break out different HTTP requests coming in into dedicated fleets and dedicated load balancers, and break out every single asynchronous job, of which we have many hundreds, into like dedicated auto-scaling groups on EC2. So kind of reasonably good and well understood scaling patterns to keep all this stuff running on top of. Yeah, here's like CLOC running on our stuff. For some reason, there's like a load of JSON and JavaScript in there as well. And here's a tweet from like co-founder of Intercom and our chief engineer, Kieran, who this was part of the Twitter discourse recently, where he was kind of showing how like Rails is scaling pretty well for us. These like peaks, they're kind of averaged out by Datadog, or averages or something silly like that. But you can see like we've got some pretty good traffic rates being served per second here. So that's it. Everything's great. And yeah, thanks for coming to my talk. But actually getting here was like a lot of work. We didn't just wake up in the morning and decide to like run at scale and like, just find some architecture book or, type it into ChatGPT, like, hey, how do we just run all this kind of stuff at scale? And at the same time, we're just dealing with this really fast growing business and adding lots and lots of engineers and wanting to get a lot of work done. And, like Intercom we're not a Ruby on Rails company. It's certainly what got us off the ground, but it's not like we take a fairly pragmatic approach to technology in general, and we're open to new ideas and stuff. And so we've kind of learned a bunch of lessons and had to figure out a bunch of stuff as we went along. And so we've ended up trying some things, and a lot of it was pretty successful and worked at the time. But we've gotten to like certain learnings after all of this. So I fed in like our timeline into like a really advanced ML system and got it to draw like some sort of diagram of like our architecture. And so you can see like things kind of grew really fast at the start, then like a bit of a mess. And now we're at this like nice kind of plateau and things are pretty stable and well understood. So I'm going to talk through those kind of 3 phases and use 3 acts of Intercom's architecture here. This is like 3-act structure, kind of completely ripping off Shakespeare and Star Wars. So as with all models and abstractions, they don't actually perfectly fit into reality, but it's a good enough way to kind of think through what's happened and of kind of showing the different phases of things. And we certainly didn't know we were explicitly in each of these acts at the time. So, there's some, I'm taking some liberty with some of the facts, but the story mostly works. So Act 1, the setup. So back in 2011, Intercom was this nice, small, like single Rails app, single GitHub repository. We were running in Heroku, which was just a great place at the time to ship code in and deliver stuff to customers. Bit of a no-brainer at the time, but it was kind of pretty ubiquitous. But then almost we had like Act 1, Scene 2 of where we started to outgrow what was available in Heroku at the time. And so we started like evolving in kind of standard enough ways, which was to like add in MySQL databases running in AWS or DS. And then later on, we built like little deployment tools to spin up EC2 hosts to take the workload off of Heroku and get kind of full control over scalability and take advantage of this AWS services that were coming online at the time, like S3 and ELB and CloudFront and the like. So this was, when Intercom wasn't necessarily a viable company. It was like very early kind of Series A kind of stuff. Things were moving fast, and we had the unfortunate problem of hitting product market fit. And so then suddenly we had to raise more money and hire more engineers and start to build a lot of stuff. So this kind of quickly brings us into Act 2, the confrontation. So this is where a lot of things happen. So, I mean, very importantly, I joined Intercom around here. And so this curse of product market fit and having to scale the team and infrastructure, but also like our ambitions were pretty high as well of what we wanted to do with the company. So we had this, core team of who had built Intercom initially with Rails, and that was good. But we wanted to be able to just build a lot more stuff with a lot more people involved. We're very open to change and new ideas and just generally scaling how we built and what we built, both from the people and kind of technology side of view. So a lot of factors here were kind of coming into like trying out some new things and maybe bringing in some new patterns. We also started to run into like basic scalability problems in our Rails app at the time. So we were struggling scaling our MySQL databases. We were fighting constantly with keeping CI alive. Like one of our core tenets in Intercom is that shipping is our heartbeat. And so we were really convinced, and still are to this day, of like the connection between being able to ship code and get it into production and to like see how it actually works and keeping that loop as like tight as possible for our developers, as we believe it's like the best way to build product so that your customers actually like. And so we would spend a lot of time just trying to make sure that we've continually got a CI/CD pipeline that works at all. And we'll get pretty stressed out if we couldn't deploy. And then when we did deploy and the database went down, that was also pretty stressful as well. So there was just a lot of stuff going on, a lot of fires happening. And so we started trying out some new things. And this is where like our architecture started expanding well beyond like the Rails app in the single GitHub repository and looking nothing like you could deploy in Heroku. So we built like a WebSocket service in a new Java application. This was kind of designed in itself to be a bit of a new Java kind of monolith. The WebSockets, like they're pretty high volume. They're opening up connections out into every single client of ours. So like our messenger pops up on people's web pages. So they're talking like millions and millions and millions of WebSockets and that. And certainly at the time, we didn't have that much confidence that we could easily do this in the Rails app, and certainly didn't want to avoid putting that load inside of our Rails monolith because it could put things at risk. So this was, also we'd hired a bunch of like engineers from like FANG companies like myself or whatever. So obviously we wrote a Java application to terminate this traffic. And the Rails monolith would talk to this over like standard HTTP inside of our AWS network. And it was backed by Redis pub subs, pretty simple stuff, but definitely outside of the Rails app and looked nothing like what we've been doing in the monolith. We've been doing billing inside of the Rails monolith, and like it kind of makes sense for a lot of billing information to be inside the Rails app, but we wanted to iterate fast on our billing. We wanted to try out new packaging and pricing, and there was a lot of kind of customer data that needed to be collected, and invoices had to be sent, all of this kind of stuff. And so these jobs aren't like critical to be in the Rails monolith, but more to the point, like the team who are working on this stuff were ambitious. They wanted to work independently, and they didn't want to be breaking stuff while they were doing their own stuff. And so like this is directly from a presentation given of after we extracted the billing code out into its own Rails app. And like honestly, it was a bit of a copy and paste job, but it split out things into like allowed them to operate independently. It meant that they weren't like stepping on our toes, running production infrastructure, or that they weren't putting the database or CI under threat. And so the team saw this as just like a huge relief that they were able to get their own productivity back and that they weren't putting other things at risk by doing their own development. So this was like very much seen as a success at the time. And we wrote our front end in Ember.js, so extracted it out of the Rails GitHub repository, most of the JavaScript codes now that our customers interact with. We entirely separated the build, deploy, and development process of that part of it, all backed by Ruby on Rails powered APIs. So, like a bunch of the front end, great front end stuff in Ruby on Rails these days doesn't apply for us, unfortunately, but this allowed the front end development to like just get done without, again, kind of blocking CI or getting done without putting other services at risk. We started to build out net new functionality into other kind of standalone applications as well. So like webhook delivery and event processing. Events is like this small bit of functionality in Intercom. Were like core new features that we ship to customers. And we built new Java applications to deliver those. And they were seen as being potentially high throughput kind of things. And again, we were kind of suspicious about our ability to run Rails at scale for these kind of bursty and customer-facing workloads. So we built them in standalone Java applications, like communicate with them over HTTP via internal load balancers, and that they were there set up so that if we started to build out other core functionality, they could talk and interact with each other in like a service mesh or whatever. And as like with many Java applications, this stuff was like kind of overly complex compared to what we'd expect, I guess, in a Ruby on Rails application, but it did the job, and kind of these things have scaled for years, or did scale for years without us having to do much work with them. We started to build out some small integrations. So as Intercom continued to grow, we wanted to integrate with companies like Shopify and Twitter. And we started to do this in like standalone Rails apps and standalone Golang apps, which are starting to become popular around here. We also built out a functionality like a help center that our customers use. And again, kind of built this into a standalone Rails app. And so you can see like these patterns were forming of where there's lots of new projects or new customer facing stuff was being done in like these standalone apps. And we decided to embark on like another monolith application. There was a lot of overlap between what the Shopify app was doing, and we were looking at rewriting or like doing kind of more, better integrations into things like Salesforce and Stripe and Slack and all these other great services. And again, we just didn't want to slow things down in the monolith. We wanted to be able to build this stuff in isolation and kind of keep these two things running at the same time and not step on each other's toes. Somewhere around now, serverless happened. Like, AWS released Lambda, and it was like, oh, kind of looks cool. Maybe we can stop worrying about these servers and Rails processes and stuff, and start to like move out some work to these things. Never really worked out. We kind of moved some small stuff into there, kind of dabbled a little bit, but we never really got the kind of developer experience or like observability and kind of maintainability that we expect to be able to kind of ship constantly, adding new features and having good visibility into what's actually happening for our customers. So this was like a small kind of side experiment which didn't really work out. But all at the same time, we were running the Rails monolith, and we were starting to develop more features in like the core Intercom platform. And all this time as well, had more and more customers, so we're adding just small features here and there. So even though we'd kind of got into this pattern of building out a lot of net new things in these standalone services, this Rails monolith was only adding more code to it and adding more developers to it and adding more scale to it. And so while there was all this kind of messy stuff happening, we didn't abandon the monolith. And it's not like we had made a solid architectural decision that the monolith was dead and that we need to like get a plan to get off it. It was still there, and we like functionality like smart campaigns and different things were like just built inside of this monolith. So that was happening all along, kind of in the background. So moving on to Act 3. This is where we get to like some sort of resolution, and we get to like sail off into the sunset or something and give cool talks like now. So this is a slide that I've shamelessly ripped off from Dan McKinley's Choose Boring Technology talk, which was massively influential to me and others at Intercom. And I think it just does a good example. It shows how much stuff there is in like running things. And we built all this stuff for our customers. Customers were reasonably happy. They kept signing up and using our services. But the teams who were building features and were like the way we work at Intercom is very focused on like impact and like actually shipping things to customers. And the teams that were running these things and running these kind of other services, they just started to get very bored of like having to do all this stuff. But it was stuff that we were getting good at and better at in the monolith, and that the monolith started to have like a bit of a core team running it, and we were just getting good at like upgrades and different things. And all those kind of services that had kind of been written just started to fall behind, and we didn't see that there was a huge amount of appetite for like just doing all the stuff in this slide. And so we started to get better at articulating like what works at Intercom, like what good projects look like, what good success looks like for teams. And so Rich Archibald articulated this in a blog post on our blog called Run Less Software. And we saw, just like by introspection, looking at like what teams are doing great, what projects are doing great, that the teams who just built on top of the monolith are reuse more things rather than introducing new stuff. And even this could be rewritten as like run fewer software. It's like they were more successful. They spent more of their time delivering value, shipping stuff to customers. And so we started telling people at Intercom, hey, you know what, if you want to be successful, you need to run less software. And this is not like something we're dogmatic about. It was purely like from seeing what was actually useful in our environment and in our culture. So going back to kind of first principles here and kind of articulating and things like run less software, when we looked at the services we had built, we hadn't built them because they were necessary in terms of the coordination problem. Like Steve Yeage's fictional interpretation of Jeff Bezos' mandate, where like teams had to expose all of their interfaces to each other on Amazon or they're all going to get fired. Like that kind of wasn't the way we were thinking about these things. We'd built them out of necessity due to like scale and wanting to ship and just wanting to kind of move fast in those individual areas. But reality is like we had built a load of stuff that just happened to talk to each other because our monolith at the time was in a bit of trouble and we didn't have a huge amount of confidence in it. But all these services weren't really speeding us up and the teams hated them. So once you kind of accept like, hey, this monolith thing is not going away. In fact, it's probably a better way. You start to like invest a bit more into it. And we were starting to get a bit of scale here where we could do these kind of projects as well. So like an example of one of the projects that we did inside the monolith, which is the kind of thing you do once you decide that it's not going away, is like we rewrote how we stored users in companies. These are two fundamental data pieces that are processed by the Intercom application. And this rewrote the interface, had to update like large amount, every part of code that actually interacted with a user or company. We also swapped out MongoDB for DynamoDB here, which was pretty sweet. And so these just revisiting and improving how the monolith works with these kind of fundamental data types and cleaning up the kind of interfaces, this like made like the monolith even more scalable and even more likely to kind of continue and grow into the future. And we just got good through just a load of small projects, a load of different things into like the Rails app being good at getting good at upgrades. Like for a while we were completely stuck. We could not upgrade Ruby on Rails that easily, or Ruby itself, or Passenger. These things were like really difficult for a while. And so like that slide that I had up earlier on of like Eugene just kind of casually upgrading Ruby on Rails, like that's, the ability to do that is down to like just years and years of chipping away, making it easy, or making it easier, and just investment in this stuff. And so we've done this across all these kind of areas where we no longer have these as fundamental blockers or things that we, I guess, things are major risks for our business and also for our architecture. Okay, so am I actually going to talk about the thing of what I'm up here to talk about? So getting back to webhooks, so the Java service that we had built to basically do the job of delivering webhooks, which can be pretty bursty, pretty noisy. Like we get a lot of customers building on top of Intercom through our APIs or integrating other applications that can be kind of bursty and noisy. And the job of delivering webhooks can be kind of difficult as well because you can just have to do a lot of delivery attempts and kind of retry jobs and do all this kind of messy stuff. So we had isolated into this like Java application, but nothing else was actually delivering webhooks, or rather delivering webhook jobs to the Java app. And this worked mostly fine for like many, many years until it fell over one day and just took a while to kind of get it back up and running. We lost all this Java expertise and stuff in the meantime. And we also were kind of blocked on building new functionality. So we wanted to add more functionality into like the feature of webhooks, like adding more kind of state or giving more information to our end users about what was going on with the webhooks and more configurability of these things. And you know, this stuff isn't impossible. You kind of add more state or share some information between the webhooks application and the Rails monolith, but we just didn't want to do this. And so the team didn't want to run this stuff. We wanted to write more functionality. And so we ended up just rewriting it into the monolith using the kind of newer, updated, existing patterns that we had around like how to scale services inside of our monolith. So, you know, the team at the time did consider, like maybe we should rewrite this in Golang, or maybe we could introduce new things into the Rails monolith. And we just didn't do that. We just used like SQS and had some nice workers and just managed to kind of relatively easily port over webhook functionality and then add new functionality into our monolith. We also ported our help center, which was a Ruby on Rails application that was a standalone thing. And we were kind of blocked on adding new functionality, and it was kind of a pain to maintain. The team didn't really want to be doing that kind of maintenance work. And so we used the genius method of like just basically copying and pasting code into the Rails monolith. Like we didn't do any fancy stuff like Rails engines or different things. We already had a lot of code in the Rails monolith, so we weren't making things much worse. We did have to do a bit of work around like tuning rack attack configuration and like updating routes and different things, but it was largely a copy and paste job. But you know, these are like direct quotes from the document that we used to kind of justify this work. And the team were just like, we don't want to make changes in multiple repositories to get this work done. Also, we've done a really bad job of keeping this stuff up to date. This is just no fun. So yeah, we didn't do anything fancy here. It was largely just a copy and paste job, which has its disadvantages, and there's some style differences and things like that. But you know, the code is in there, and we've done a huge amount of work over the last year on adding functionality to the help center that I don't think would have been possible at all, or at least would have been a lot slower if we had left it in this kind of standalone thing. So yeah, the team also reported back that, you know, we just got all this stuff for free. Like the team no longer has to worry about upgrading Rails, and they also got to take advantage of all of the cool observability improvements and just like all the stuff that we had done for the monolith. They just got it for free, which was great. So I talked about like monolithifying a bunch of stuff, but we also just we stopped building stuff outside the monolith. So it just became a default path for everything, and we stopped a lot of conversations. We didn't write a lot of docs. We didn't bring a lot of stuff out there. And so this in itself was just a great win to have, and you know, made sure that we were able to do what we wanted to focus on, what we reward and want our teams to be doing, which is delivering features for customers. So we have loads more to do in terms of continuing to like monolithify our microservices. There's still a lot of stuff sitting out there. There's like that integrations app I mentioned. We still have a bit of Java running away when no one really knows what to do with it. And there's a lot of work to do as well in the monolith itself. Just like once you get to the scale of having like millions of lines of code, you need to start to get good at like dead code removal and maybe trying out different scaling patterns. It's like just the hundreds and hundreds of workers just become a bit of a pain to individually monitor and scale and stuff like that. And we've also expanded, we've expanded into multiple regions. So we're running this application in Europe and Australia as well. And that presents different challenges. Like it's the same code, similar patterns, but just different environments have very, very different scalings. Setups, and you want to also provide an interface which isn't too bad for your developers to have to work with. So there's loads more work we can do to kind of incrementally improve our architecture and continue to make life easier for our developers. But you know, we're pretty happy that we're on like a good path, and we're getting a lot of return on the work we do here in terms of like scaling and just make it easy to operate. So lessons learned. So I think, well, first, like the 3-act structure can be applied to any set of messy circumstances, so feel free to use that. Also, I'm hoping that we can get monolithify into the dictionary. I'm a big fan of nouning verbs. But in terms of this talk, I think our architecture didn't come from like an architecture team or anything like that. We didn't go in, even though we came from being a Ruby on Rails like small application, we weren't dogmatic about that, and we're definitely open to different ways of working and introducing new technologies and letting teams be kind of independent around their choices. And maybe we would have been better off figuring out all these things up front. I gave a version of this talk a few weeks ago as a trial run in Dublin at like just a small meetup, and I was asked the question like, what would you have done differently not to end up like this? And I couldn't answer. I just couldn't. I had no idea. But like when I thought about it, it was like, well, like we could have been less ambitious, or like had more control over teams, or like stopped them from working, or stopped them from solving the problems the way they wanted to. And just none of that kind of made sense. So I think there's no like specific technical thing that you should or shouldn't do when you get away from here. I think the reality of scaling and growing your business and like getting to a point of like hopeful stability and success, it's gonna be messy and it's gonna be hard. And what worked well for us is like an amount of experimentation, like sticking to our core principles of really optimizing for shipping and optimizing for customer value, but also reflecting on what's working well and what's not, and occasionally investing in kind of some of that kind of core infrastructure. So thank you all. You can get me on Twitter at Brian Scanlan, or just throw my name into Google. You'll find me there. So thanks all for listening.